Hello, welcome to Psych 92. This is Dr. Grace Estrada. We're going to be talking about Chapter 8, Middle Adulthood Cognitive Development. So first of all, as I mentioned in the previous component about overall changes in middle adulthood brain functioning, we actually use more of our brains in middle adulthood than in our youth. We did hopefully recall that we talked about types of intelligences. So with middle adulthood, if we're thinking about the perspective of crystallized and fluid intelligence, it's important to know that in middle adulthood, your crystallized intelligence is actually greater than when you're younger. It makes sense. Either you've gone to more school or you've just had more experiences in life. So crystallized intelligence, remember, is the accumulated knowledge that you've had over your lifespan. So this includes things like your vocabulary, some facts such as semantic knowledge, maybe your language abilities, and that continues to increase with age. Fluid intelligence, on the other hand, that is your ability to learn new ways of solving problems, adapt to changes, and perform activities quickly. And so fluid intelligence tends to decrease with age while crystallized intelligence increases. So here is sort of just a graph that kind of shows from birth to 70 years. As you can see, up till about age 30, so emerging adulthood and early adulthood, they both continue to increase, the fluid and crystallized intelligence. Then after that, you see that the crystallized intelligence, the blue line, continues to increase, whereas the fluid intelligence starts to decrease. That's not to say that you can't maintain it, but a lot of times people are not actively going through activities to help maintain the fluid intelligence. So people who continue to work in their senior years are actually better to maintain those components than those who retire early. So the Seattle longitudinal study, that's a long-going study since 1956. They bring their participants back every 7 years, and they're looking at these changes that are happening. So what do we see? Verbal memory continues to increase. Spatial skills, so being able to estimate how things will fit, that keeps increasing as well. Being able to generalize from specific examples continues to work, and also vocabulary. What decreases, again, without practice, really is how well people can conduct numerical computations. And one thing that does, because of sensory changes in your body, the perceptual speed tends to decline. So here's just a graph of the different types of abilities that you'll notice. Again, it peaks, maybe in your 50s even, and then it starts to go down. These things can be mitigated, as I mentioned, with conscious effort and certain activities. Flow is what we call it when somebody is so involved in an activity that they completely lose track of time. So it's a mental state of being completely present and fully absorbed in a task. A lot of times this is when people are engaging in creative activities, painting, drawing, making something, or playing music. This is what we call it when people are in flow. They are in like the state of incredible joy and satisfaction. And you don't get into flow because you're being paid to do something. So the idea is it's intrinsic reward in and of itself. Tacit knowledge is the type of knowledge that we have when it's very practical and pragmatic. So it's not necessarily something you would get in school, right? You're not going to get it from a textbook. Tacit knowledge is learned through experience. And oftentimes it's just figuring out how to use your skills and solve problems in very practical ways. So tacit knowledge tends to increase with age as well. Oops. Okay, so in terms of education, I'll have to get newer numbers. 17% of students age 35 and above are in higher education. In community colleges, that's even higher because we play that role in our community where we like to give people opportunities to continue their education, even if they haven't followed a traditional path out of high school. What do we know about our older students? Well, they might take longer to learn things, to process information, but they actually retain it better than their younger counterparts. So experience and better learning strategies help a lot in terms of compensating for that time that it might take them longer to learn. And ultimately, they learn the material much deeper than their younger counterparts. So older students know that it's more important to emphasize understanding, relevance, and mastery rather than simple memorization. So when we talk about expertise, an expert usually is someone who has spent more than 10,000 hours of their life gaining this knowledge in a specific area. So it's somebody with specialized skills and knowledge. What are some factors that we know that experts have? Well, they're intuitive. So let's consider a chef, somebody who, has spent many, many hours in the kitchen, right? And they're given a recipe. First of all, they're not going to follow a recipe the way a novice would. So a novice is somebody who has limited experience with a particular task. What you will see is somebody who's an expert will be very intuitive about perhaps little changes that they can make to that recipe to make it taste better. It's automatic. They know approximately, what temperature to put, what setting to put the things to cook, what sort of seasonings will automatically taste good with certain foods. So they're intuitive, they're automatic. This is coming from the experience they've had. Strategic. Maybe if the oven isn't working, they'll know how to make up for that with something just cooking it on the stovetop, for example. Flexible, they can take on more challenging tasks because they have a wider base of knowledge to draw upon. And it's also important to know that even though they're intuitive, automatic, strategic, and flexible, if somebody experiences something like a stroke, all of these components won't be able to make up for all the cognitive losses, but they will be much better and able to adjust than those who are not experts in the same field. So in terms of midlife, now this is changing. Right? A lot of people stay and work longer. The COVID pandemic played a really huge role in causing a lot of people to retire because they did not want to or were not capable of making that change to remote work. Also, it for some people who were able to make the change, they didn't want to go back into the office anymore. So it really impacted work life a lot. Fewer adults in middle adulthood and just enter the workforce at this stage. Usually they're transitioning to a different type of work, or they're transitioning out of work completely. If you love your job and you're middle-aged, it tends to peak at this time, right? You're probably doing something you like, you have coworkers you enjoy, you have more pay. Because you're more mature, you tend to have more autonomy from your employers. So a lot of times, this is all helpful in producing greater work satisfaction at this stage. The glass ceiling, unfortunately, still exists. So remember, the glass ceiling is a type of discrimination that happens at work. Oftentimes it's for women and people who are from minority groups, where you'll notice that in a company, women and people who are minorities only reach a certain stage, right? That's why it's called a glass ceiling. They can't seem to break and go higher in the company. So now companies are much more mindful to be explicitly try to have a diverse work composition, but even then it's important to pay attention in case that you have sort of what we call token people in these positions. You want to make sure that the company is really supportive and providing equal opportunities for promotion and things like that, regardless of somebody's gender identity or their race. Job burnout. So on one hand, people who are middle-aged enjoy their work more than younger people. But people who are middle-aged also may experience job burnout where they feel, like they're not getting anywhere in work. They feel very frustrated and maybe want to retire or quit. So here's an interesting figure that shows, based on country, how much work people are completing annually. So if you look at it, it goes from Australia all the way to the United States. Mexico actually has the highest annual hours worked, 2,246 a year. United States is at 1790, so we're sort of in the middle. The lowest is Germany at 1371. So it's quite interesting how it changes based on where somebody lives. So some challenges in midlife, oftentimes it's economic. If people have fewer hours available to them, they might have to go part-time. This could result in loss of retirement savings. And also what's unfortunately well known is that it's much more difficult for people who are middle-aged to start new jobs. So there's almost like that age discrimination coming on. Why is that? Younger people have less experience, so they're cheaper to hire. And sometimes companies don't want to invest in training somebody who's middle-aged because they view it as, oh, well, this person's middle-aged, they're going to retire pretty soon, and they would rather train somebody who's younger. Also, people who are middle-aged tend to be less likely to relocate than their younger counterparts. In terms of leisure, it's really important. We should make a point to have leisure in our lives, at least weekly. I know daily is very challenging, but there are benefits for your physical and mental health. Unfortunately, people consider watching TV a large part of their leisure time, which isn't, it's a very passive activity. It's also sedentary. So that kind of rolls into a lot of problems people might have physically as they enter middle-aged. Men spend more time in leisure than in women. People who are, especially parents. So if you're parents, females tend to have less leisure time than men because still traditionally females are generally the primary caregiver in that kind of relationship. America has less paid time off than other countries. What is important to a lot of our younger counterparts is the flexible ability to take time off as long as work is conducted. And so it depends really on the company that you're working for. So here's an interesting chart on time spent in leisure and activities by gender. So men are in the darker, like burgundy, and women are in the brighter red. In almost everything, men exceed women in terms of the way that they spend time. The only one is reading, that women tend to spend more time in reading than men do. And these are the legally mandated times off based by country. In light blue is paid holidays, in dark blue is paid vacation. As you can see, United States is really, really bad in terms of legally mandated time off. We don't have any. It's up to the company that you're working for. So best place looks like France in terms of paid vacation days. They have 30 paid vacation days, and this is mandated by their country. So overall cognitive development, keep in mind it's we continue to build our crystallized intelligence. Our fluid intelligence might decrease, but again, that can be mitigated by explicit activities, explicit practice to maintain that ability. The Seattle longitudinal study really helped us understand the changes in the different types of abilities as we get older. Know what flow is, what does it mean to be in flow? What kind of activities tend to engender that feeling of flow? How are middle adults doing in terms of college, right? How are middle-aged students comparing to their younger counterparts? Make sure you know the difference between being an expert and a novice. Those, remember, 4 components to being an expert. And the importance of leisure to mental health and successful retirement. So I am going to stop it here for a moment and then see if there are any questions. Here we go. And I'll stop the recording.